All right, with me now is the host of Unapologetic with Amala on Prager, Amala Ekpunobi. Amala, good to see you.
It's good to be here, Liz.
And you and I just did a sit down on your show a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. So we had a really good time on your show. We talked about whether the term groomer is an appropriate description for what the left is doing to children in public school. And I think it didn't take us very long to come to the conclusion that yes, it is the appropriate description. But I highly recommend that everyone go watch that episode. I want to talk to you about your story, though. Your story is very interesting to me. You were raised in a leftist household. You were an organizer for the left, and then you converted to conservatism. I know a lot of people ask you what it was, like what policy or what politics brought you to conservatism, but I want to ask you something a little bit different. I want to ask you if there was a person who was instrumental in opening your eyes to reality or the truth or conservatism. Is there a who brought you to conservatism?
You know, there were definitely multiple people in my life that sort of had conservative values and were just ever present throughout my growing up that I realize now had a massive influence on me. I think more than anyone, it was my grandparents. So my mother represented this super radical leftist ideology throughout my childhood, and my grandparents in the background were just these quiet, unassertive conservatives who had just been married a long time and sort of showed their values in the way that they lived. And when I started going through my conversion to conservatism and experiencing that and going, oh, I don't quite agree with that, I started vocalizing that to my grandparents, and they just sort of nodded along like, yep, we've been thinking this all along, but we never truly pressed you on it. And I just realized that throughout my life, they had constantly been there just representing their values in the way that they lived, and that influenced me more than I would have ever even been able to realize back then.
Man, isn't that accountability for us all to make sure we live our values, right? Even if we're not talking politics, because it has such an incredible influence on other people. So as a former radical leftist, this is something that I am always curious about, looking at conservatives through the eyes of the left. There are a lot of misconceptions, but some things may not be a misconception. In your opinion, given your unique perspective, what do conservatives do wrong, either from a policy perspective or from a perspective of communicating that policy to others?
I think one thing that I don't want to call it wrong because it's just the way that they communicate and it is seemingly different from the left. They're far less emotional, it seems, in a lot of the arguments that they make and the way that they describe things and explain their point of view. And for me, as a young person, emotion was so connected to who I was as a person. And I feel like the left really utilized that. They're very fond of storytelling and grassroots organizing and making one story sort of set the stage for all the issues and the campaigns that they run. Whether that's a good thing to do, we can debate, but it is a very powerful thing to do. And when I was listening to conservatives or I saw things like Fox News, it seemed like this very stone cold, here are the facts, here are the stats, here's the study that I read to come to the conclusion that I came to, and that's nowhere near as powerful as emotion. So as a conservative now, when I'm having conversations about issues or my perspective, I do bring in emotion and mix it in with the factual things that I'm talking about, because that really does break through to people and it humanizes your perspective.
Yeah, I think that's pretty powerful. So you were an organizer on the left. What do conservatives not know about the left, whether it's voters, whether it's politicians, or whether it's sort of the lobbying activist apparatus?
Oh, that's an interesting one, because I think conservatives really do look into leftist arguments, what they're saying, some of the things that they use to back them, while the left, I didn't do that, at least while I was on the left. I was actually encouraged not to look into conservative thinkers, not to listen to anything that they had to say. So I think we have sort of a stronghold on the arguments that they're making. It's really just that human emotional factor that is lacking. When I was working for the political left, so much of what their work was and what my day in and day out was building personal connections to people. I was traveling around not to have discussions over the internet or to make YouTube videos, but to talk face to face with people. And that's what really influenced people in my direction, being able to speak with them face to face in that grassroots way that I feel like conservatives don't do as often, was super powerful and mobilizing, because they want to know that you are a member of their community. They want to know that you are right there, that you are feeling exactly what they're feeling, that you're experiencing all the woes that they go through. And I think conservatives could be better at doing that, of going out and having those direct conversations with people. Now, I'm sure there are conservatives who are doing that, but that's not the general vibe that we get from looking at our movement.
So that's very interesting. You say you were told when you worked for the political left not to read or listen to conservative viewpoints and arguments?
Yes, absolutely. I was told that conservatives represented something evil, that they did not care about me, that they solely for being born a black female felt that I should not be successful in this country and wanted to place as many barriers as they could in front of my success or that path to success. And hearing that, you're told you shouldn't give them the time of day. They have no place in this conversation. I heard a lot while working at the office that I was working at that white people had no place in telling me anything about issues or educating me or talking to me about social issues that affected me. There is this somewhat cultish, I know that is a very strong word, dogma that circulates in these very left-leaning organizations that says you believe everything that we believe to the T, and if you deviate from that, you're gone and your voice no longer matters. And when I recognized that maybe I should listen to people of a differing perspective, as soon as I did, I thought, oh my gosh, all the ideology that I believe so far is crumbling. And when it does, you go, oh, wow, I was just held in this capsule and completely blocked off from differing perspectives as a means to keep me where I was, to keep me as a victim, and to keep me believing this dogma that I had been learning all my life.
Do you still talk to your former colleagues that work on the political left?
No, so my mother worked for the same organization. I still have a fantastic relationship with my mother, and I've heard through her that the people that she continues to work with are, of course, seeing my work and seeing my face a lot more often now, but none of them have reached out to discuss my transition or where I lie now. And when I was working there, that was exactly the experience that I had. I came to them and I expressed the disillusion that I was feeling surrounding their political campaigns and the things that they thought. And as soon as I expressed that concern, I was pushed away and told that I just simply didn't understand how oppressed I was and that it wasn't their job to teach me of that oppression, which is something that you'll hear quite often. The onus is not on you emotionally or intellectually to justify your arguments to other people or to convince them of your side. You simply believe what you believe and you don't let people challenge it.
It's really shocking. I want to read you a little excerpt from a New York Times piece. The title of the article is called "How Much Racism Do You Face in Your Daily Life?" And this is what the New York Times writes. They say, in "How Much Racism Do You Face Every Day?" Amy Harmon writes about the experiences of 101 black teenagers in Washington, D.C. who were surveyed about how much racism they experience on a daily basis. This is what Amy Harmon writes. She goes, collectively, the 101 black teens participating in the study reported more than 5,600 experiences of racial discrimination over 2 weeks. That boils down to an average of more than 5 instances per day for each teenager. That's more than 70 over 2 weeks. So I want to ask you, not just for a generalized response to this, but I want to ask you, has this been your experience? Is this an accurate portrayal of what life is like in the United States for a young black person?
I can't speak to their personal experiences on the matter, but I'm going to speculate and say, no, that's not the experience. And something that they do very tactfully is convince you that things that on their own are not racist whatsoever suddenly have this sort of underlying unconscious racism to them. I was told so often as a kid that people who asked me about my skin color were racist. Kids who had seen my hair and went, oh, well, that's hair I haven't seen before. Can I touch it? That was something that was racist. It represented a microaggression. Kids who talked to me and said, oh, well, your mom is white and you're black. How did that happen? That was racism. We're now convincing people that these small acts of human curiosity or just questions and statements are somehow a representation of racism in this country. And it's because we no longer have, to the same extent that we had in, like, say, the 1950s, these acts of blatant racism, like somebody coming up to you and calling you the N-word or saying that you shouldn't be educated because you're a black person in America. There's very seldom instances of that sort of racism. And because we don't have that to lean on anymore, the left creates new forms of racism, these ideas of unconscious bias and microaggressions, and convinces these young black kids that that is the world that they're living in, that these are the barriers that are set in place for them from the moment they're born. And it is truly horrifying because I grew up in a rural conservative small town in Florida, which should have been, according to the left, the hotbed for systemic racism. I didn't experience an ounce of it, but because I had been indoctrinated, because I had been told all these things throughout my childhood, I was convinced that America was racist, even though I hadn't experienced it. And I have a feeling that's what's happening with a lot of Black people and people of color in America right now.
Right. Ibram X. Kendi calls it the smog of white supremacy. He wrote an entire book on how to indoctrinate your children to be a quote-unquote anti-racist based on the fact that his 1-year-old daughter was playing with a doll with blonde hair and blue eyes, presumably with white doll skin, plastic doll skin. Do you think that America was founded as an institutionally racist nation? Are we still an institutionally racist nation?
No, I don't think we were founded in institutional racism, and people who say that we are hard pressed to find really any evidence of it. I understand the institution that was slavery. I understand Jim Crow laws, but often when you ask people about examples of systemic racism in America, that is all that they have to lean on. And these institutions and systems and pieces of legislation are long gone. So to people who believe that, where is it? Can you give me an example? And they can't, which is so often the case. And what that argument really does is it says, because these institutions and systems are founded in racism, and because I've convinced you of that, the only avenue we can take now is to abolish or completely reform and transform. And they will use any argument in the book they can to justify the claim that they're racist, or that we live in a country where people, specifically white people, are born with racism, and they will have nothing to back it up. They constantly just run on emotions and trying to convince people. So for people who do believe that narrative, I just ask you, where is an example of systemic racism? I've tried day in and day out to find one and to make the argument from the leftist perspective, because if I'm wrong, I would love to be proved wrong. But so far, I haven't been.
So that's the justification, exactly what you just articulated, is the justification for leftist policies like reparations, or even like affirmative action. So let me ask you, do you support or oppose reparations and affirmative action now in our country?
I completely oppose it. And affirmative action specifically, I'm very strong on. People like Ibram X. Kendi, who you mentioned earlier, will say that we need to justify and we need to fix past discrimination with current discrimination. That is not true at all. And what these policies are doing is actually harming people of color in this country, and particularly Black people. If I get a job because a diversity, equity, and inclusion program hires me, I didn't get the job based on my merit, based on the standards that I've met. I got the job based on my skin color. So now you've robbed me of actually being able to say, I've done something based on my merit and my character. And then what you've done is actually created a racist climate in America, because now every single white person, Hispanic person, Asian person who did not get that job gets to look around at people of color who are in these upper echelon positions and go, well, I don't know that you got that job based on your merit and based on your character. So you are then creating a new form of racism where we can't trust that people are getting things based on the actual achievements that they've made. All of it will be based on skin color and gender and sexuality and these very arbitrary, superficial identity markers that we've come to think are pivotal in our lives. So I think these sort of policies are extremely detrimental. And as far as reparations, you can't just throw money at something and expect it to fix or have some sort of cultural shift that affects the Black community. It's simply not how it works.
It's not. Let me ask you, Amala, on a more personal level, are you Christian? Are you religious?
No, I'm not. I guess you would call it agnostic. I'm just sort of in this I don't know area in life right now.
Well, let me ask, the reason that I ask you that actually is because a lot of people on the right are motivated to fight for the policies that they fight for based on their faith, their religious beliefs, the doctrine of their theology. What animates you to fight for what's right, if not faith?
Truth animates me to fight for what I think is right. And I think a lot of the dogma and the policy prescriptions that I was taught from a young age, I didn't know how harmful they actually were. And through education and research, I found how harmful they were. And as I expressed from a really young age, I viewed myself as a victim in this country by virtue of being born Black and female, and that hindered me in more ways than I will ever know. Who knows how successful I would have been had I not had that mindset. And to think that now young people are growing up in a country where they're taught this from birth, essentially now, and being placed in public schools that are teaching it, and then when they graduate, the college just teach it, and then when they go to work, corporate America teaches it as well, is harmful. And I think of all the things that I was robbed of by having that mindset, and I can't imagine that happening on such a grand scale. And it is. And I decided that if I can stop somebody from going down the same path that I did and believing that, I will do my best to do that and to debunk all the lies that they're telling right now. So that is my main motivator. And I think I represent a really hard opponent when it comes to people on the left who try to have backlash against conservative ideas, because I'm not white, I'm not male, and I'm not religious. So you don't get to throw these typical characterizations of conservatives at me. I just don't take it. And I have a rebuttal for that because I exist in this realm of ideology.
And not in the left's stereotype. Amala, are you pro-life?
I am pro-life, yes, and not from a religious perspective.
Talk to me about that. I'm very interested. Again, that's usually something that faith informs pro-lifers. Why are you pro-life if it's not based on faith?
Sure. So years ago, I would have told you that I was pro-choice, but I would never make that decision. And I came to a fork in the road where I had to ask myself, why would you never make that decision for yourself? And if so, why do you advocate that others make that decision? And I realized it's because I thought it was harmful. It is the taking of a life, and that's something I wouldn't wish upon myself or anyone else. So that was a major mover for me identifying as pro-life. And I realized that much of the arguments that we have surrounding the issue of pro-life versus pro-choice or pro-abortion, however you would like to characterize it, surround this idea of when life starts. And while the left argues, they constantly try to delegitimize the argument of when life starts from the conservative perspective. And outside of religion, objectively through science, we can look and see when life starts. So why does the left spend all this time trying to delegitimize what is scientifically factual? And when I realized that, I went, oh no, I've been on the wrong side of this argument. And while I think there are discussions that we should have around things like rape, incest, medical necessity in the mother's life, much of abortion is just used as a contraceptive at this point and as a means to say this is inconvenient for me right now and I don't want to deal with this in life. And that's where I am very much pro-life and don't think that we should enable what is happening right now in this country.
So one of the fun things that we do on this show when I'm interviewing a guest like you is I look to my locals community, the Liz Wheeler Show community, for questions. I asked them yesterday in anticipation of our interview. I asked them, what do you want me to ask Amala? And we got a lot of responses, and I picked a question that I also want to know the answer to. It's a good question. This is from Amy B on Locals, who says, Amala, what's your relationship like with your mom now that you're not a leftist?
Sure. Yeah. So when I first started to express to my mom, hey, I'm going to leave this organization, and also I don't agree with anything anymore, it was a really contentious period in our mother-daughter relationship. There was about, I would say, a span of a few months where every time that I would come to see her, we would somehow spark a political discussion that ended up and was just like a firefight between the both of us in the house. I'm surprised we didn't get the police called on us for a noise complaint with how much we were talking about these issues. And we went through that and recognized that this was not going to work out, and it's certainly not going to make our relationship sustainable. So we just decided, hey, I'm proud of you for what you're doing and that you're strong-willed and that you're following what you want to do and you're doing what you think is best for the world. I'm going to do that on my end of things and pursue this as far as it takes me. And when we have discussions, let's remember that we are a mother and daughter and that we love each other and that we want to have that mother and daughter bond and leave the politics out of it. So that's much of what we do now. We'll get into political discussions here and there, knowing each other's boundaries on the issues. And other than that, we've gotten closer than we've ever been before, just through recognizing that we want to understand each other and that we want to hold our relationship dear, which I hope other people start to do, because I'm hearing a lot of rhetoric of specifically young people saying, you know, if your family doesn't agree with you, they're toxic, cut them out of your life, they have no moral value. And to those people, I say, you know, at the end of the day, when you're on the deathbed there, you're not going to be so happy that you had that political argument with your mom 2 days ago. You're going to be happy that she's there, and you're going to be happy that you preserve that relationship regardless of what you feel politically. So we're closer than we've ever been before, and it's been great.
Do you think you'll ever change your mind to come to your side of politics?
I've thought about this in depth, and I don't think so. And the reason why is that when I started changing my mind on things, it was hard. I struggled and fought, even though I knew I was wrong, to think that I was right and to hold on to the ideology that I had, because I had dedicated what was a year in political organizing and my entire life and activism and talking to other people about these issues. And when you have to look back and go, if I'm wrong now, that means all the other things that I did were wrong as well, in part. It's hard to let go of, and you want to grasp onto it. And my mom has dedicated her entire life to leftism and continues to work for a left-leaning organization on an even larger scale than before. So I think it's going to be hard to come to terms with maybe not being correct on those issues. And she seems to have a very deep attachment to it. So I'm not going to throw away my hope on changing her mind on things, but if it doesn't happen, I completely understand why.
And that's a very sweet and poised answer. Amala, this was fabulous. I really enjoyed talking to you. As always, everybody watching this, if you want exclusive early access to interviews just like this one, then join us on the Liz Wheeler Show community on Locals. It's lizwheelershow.com/locals. You can use my promo code ACCESS for 1 month free on your annual subscription. That's lizwheelershow.com/locals, promo code ACCESS. Amala, do you want to tell everyone where they can watch your show?
Sure, absolutely. If you want to watch me, I do a daily show on Unapologetic Live on YouTube. If you just type in my name, Amala Ekpunobi, even though it's a mouthful, you will find my YouTube channel, and we're there daily talking about all these issues.
Thank you so much for being here. It was really delightful to talk to you. If you haven't already, give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button below, and ring the bell to make sure you never miss a video.